If you grew up around arcades, how can you forget this memory? Four players crowded around a machine, all shouting, smashing buttons, total chaos. Games like Ninja Turtles, The Simpsons, NBA Jam felt like peak multiplayer. It was loud, it was messy, it was fun. In that era, it was maybe the best arcade experience a kid could have, and also the fastest way to lose every quarter you had in your pocket. But here's the part we don't really question. What exactly was that chaos accomplishing? Because when you slow it down and actually look at how those games were designed, something really stands out. And once you see it, it becomes completely obvious what those games were built to do. So what were they built to do? Nostalgia often offers us a simple explanation. That chaos we remember, the huge sprites, the loud sounds, enemies everywhere, that was just the game being exciting, engaging, intense. Did it feel like sensory overload? Absolutely, because that's how arcade games were supposed to work, and multiplayer games kicked it up to 11. But if multiplayer cabinets were meant to elevate the arcade experience, why do these games get less predictable the more players you add? The screen becomes more crowded, it's harder to keep track of what's happening, everyone starts getting wiped out at the same time. I mean, there's strength in numbers, right? Shouldn't more players help you? Instead, it makes everything fall apart faster. Now, that kind of collapse isn't random. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. When you play many of these games solo, you find that you can survive for quite a while, especially with practice. Even a schlub like myself has learned to beat a few of them on a single quarter. But add a second player, things start to get messy. And four, everything goes straight to Hades. The screen fills up, enemies start stacking on top of each other, hits come from off screen. And the biggest tell? You stop losing gradually. Your whole posse starts losing all at once. And here's the point. This wasn't accidental. Arcade designers openly talked about tuning games around very specific session lengths. In 1989, developer Fukio Mitsuji described it well, saying arcade difficulty is finely targeted for commercial reasons, with a common goal of around 3 to 5 minutes per coin, just long enough to feel engaged before being pushed back to the coin slot. So that raises the stakes, because if arcade games were already designed to end quickly, what happens when you add more players into that system? To really understand this, we have to strip away the nostalgia. Arcades weren't selling games. They were selling time before failure. Every cabinet had one job: get you to play, get you to lose, and then get you to pay to try again. And if players lasted too long, that was a problem, because longer sessions meant fewer coins per hour. Arcade machines were expensive, and operators judged success by revenue per cabinet, not completion rates or even player satisfaction, as unbelievable as that may sound. So designers had to solve a very specific constraint. How do you keep players engaged while making sure they don't last too long? The answer wasn't just difficulty. It was also controlled chaos. And multiplayer games became the most efficient way to create that. How? Well, for one, the more players you added, the more enemies would be on screen. In other words, more visual noise. You lose your character in the crowd, you get hit and don't even see it coming. These conditions mean you lose faster. You also probably remember that many of these games weren't precise. There were wide hitboxes, off-screen damage, minimal invincibility frames. All of this is intentional instability. Because of this, you're always taking damage, even when you're playing well. There's no safe rhythm, no sustainable loop. You're always trending toward death. And this is the real key. One player struggling affects everyone, because the screen gets messier, mistakes add up, and suddenly multiple players die at the same time, which leads to something very specific: multiple coins inserted at the same time. And maybe this is the most powerful part of all, is how it made you feel. Because when you finally went down, the last thing you wanted to do was leave your friends hanging. So you reached for another quarter to rejoin them in the fight. So multiplayer in these games didn't increase success, it made you lose faster. More players meant more chaos. More chaos meant faster deaths. Faster deaths meant more coins. And that's the loop. And when it worked really well. Now, this model didn't appear overnight. It took a while for it to be refined. One of the earliest games to use it was Gauntlet, released in 1985, one of the first true 4-player arcade cabinets. It would be a few years later, though, when Konami would perfect the model. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in 1989, The Simpsons in 1991, the massive 6-player X-Men released in 1992. These weren't just games, they were hardware strategies. 3, 4, or even more players on one machine meant simultaneous revenue streams. And the results were immediate. By 1999, Ninja Turtles became the highest grossing arcade game in the US for that year. Now the industry had proof. More players doesn't just increase fun, it increases revenue per machine. At that point, multiplayer isn't a feature anymore, it's a business model. And once that potential was seen, the entire industry chased after it. This system didn't just shape a few games, it defined entire genres. Beat-em-ups, of course, but also arcade sports games. And at its peak, the numbers were massive. NBA Jam reportedly earned around $2,400 per machine per week, and helped generate over $1 billion in arcade revenue in a single year. But here's the critical shift. This entire system depended on one thing, the coin slot. And the moment these games moved home, that system broke. No coin slot means there's no reason to try to end your game early, no reason to overwhelm you, no reason to keep you on the edge of failure. So the goal changed from get another quarter to keep you playing. And once that shift happened, this entire style of simultaneous arcade multiplayer collapsed almost completely. Not because it wasn't fun, but because it only worked if you kept losing. So when we think back to these chaotic arcade classics, it's easy to remember the energy, the noise, the excitement. 4 people crowded around a machine, all trying to survive just a little bit longer. And for a moment, it felt like you were in it together. But that feeling didn't happen by accident. Those games weren't built for you to win. They were built to keep you going, just long enough to reach for another quarter. You weren't just playing together, you were losing together. But once the coins disappeared, the design did also. So, what do you think it was? Better multiplayer or just a better system for making you pay? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you made it this far, as always, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, happy gaming, my friends.